Welcome to this episode of our program Arab Affairs. As usual, we will be discussing an important Arab file, and today we'll be speaking about two important meetings the President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi made on the sidelines of the World Youth Forum, which took place at the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, and we have just seen this beautiful event that took place on the land of peace in Egypt. President Sisi was keen to hold those important meetings with visiting Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, as well as the Lebanese Prime Minister Naguib Mikati, where he spoke with both leaders on the Palestinian cause, with Palestinian President, on Egypt's constant position on the Palestinian cause, and how Egypt has been exerting its utmost efforts in order to be of great help to push forward the Palestinian-Israeli stalemate, plus the reconstruction of Gaza and the reconciliation among all the Palestinian factions. That is on one meeting. The other one tackled the solid relations between Egypt and Lebanon, and the Egyptian role that Egypt has been playing in the past period during the Lebanese crisis and the fall of some big institutions in the Lebanese government. We'll be speaking about those two meetings. We'll be speaking also about the developments in both causes and in both problems and developments. We'll be speaking about both cases. But before we delve into our discussion, first let us have this quick look on the Arab news that took place during this week, and we'll come back for more discussion.
At least 3 people were killed in a series of explosions, including 2 suspected suicide bombings in northwest Syria near the Turkish border, in the first such attacks this year. A rescue worker said one civilian was killed after an improvised explosive device went off in a vehicle near a transport office in the city of Azdez, which lies near the main border crossing with Turkey. A few hours later, a suicide bombing in a marketplace in the town of Beb wounded 3 and killed the suspected bomber. This was followed minutes later by another suicide bombing at a roundabout in the city of Afrin, a mainly Kurdish area which Turkish forces and their Syrian allies took from the Kurdish YPG militia in 2018. Tunisia on Wednesday announced a new nighttime stay-at-home order for the next 2 weeks in order to tamp down surging coronavirus cases. The presidency said the curfew would extend from 10 p.m. until 5 a.m. and urged the public to respect social distancing measures and wear masks. It ordered the postponement or cancellation of all public gatherings or demonstrations in closed or open spaces and vowed to accelerate its vaccination campaign. Tunisia topped 4,800 a day on Monday, along with 11 deaths. 3 people, including 2 children, were wounded in rocket attacks on Baghdad's Green Zone, with 1 hitting a school and 2 smashing into the U.S. Embassy grounds. It came as a top court suspended the newly appointed Speaker of Parliament. In recent months, dozens of rocket assaults have targeted American troops and interests in Iraq. In a social media statement, the U.S. Embassy condemned the attack, attributing it to terrorist groups attempting to undermine Iraq's security. A senior Sudanese police officer and protester were killed during protests on Thursday. Sudanese security forces fired tear gas at the thousands of protesters marching on the presidential palace in Khartoum. The rally, which converged from several parts of Khartoum, came and tapped support for a United Nations bid to facilitate talks between rival Sudanese factions. The push was aimed at resolving the crisis in the resignation of Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdouq earlier this month. Demonstrators also took to the streets in the capital's twin city of Durman, as well as in Port Sudan in eastern Sudan. A senior UN official said escalating military action in Yemen displaced more than 15,000 people over the past month, killing and injured more than 350 civilians in December, and left the Arab world's poorest nation facing growing hunger and economic collapse with no political solution in sight. UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg told the United Nations Security Council that in seventh year of conflict, the warring parties seem to be seeking military victory. But he said there is no sustainable long-term solution to be found on the battlefield, and both sides must talk even if they are not ready to lay down their arms.
Right, welcome back. And as I said at the very beginning, we'll be speaking about two important meetings the President has held on the sidelines of the World Youth Forum. And those two meetings were with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and the Lebanese Prime Minister Naguib Mikati. Before we start with our discussion, let's have this quick report and the President's meeting with both leaders.
On the sidelines of the World Youth Forum in the South Sinai resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi met Lebanese Prime Minister Naguib Mikati, who is also participating upon President Sisi's invitation. President Sisi asserted the unique nature of ties binding Egypt and Lebanon and reiterated his full support for the Lebanese government in its pursuits for meeting the aspiration of all people and completing the reforms needed to overcome such a critical phase of the Arab country's history. The Lebanese Prime Minister cherished the distinguished bilateral ties and expressed appreciation for Egypt being a key pillar of the peace, security and stability of the entire region. He also hailed the inspiring Egyptian experience in development, being a role model for all nations in the region. Meanwhile, President Sisi held a meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. The President stressed Egyptian constant positions in support of the Palestinian cause and reaching a peaceful, fair and comprehensive settlement in the Middle East, and is based on United Nations resolutions. President Sisi asserted Egypt's keen interest on backing current Palestinian diplomatic moves regionally and internationally that seek a political track that ensures a resumption of peace negotiations. For his part, the Palestinian president hailed Egypt's efforts that would enable the Palestinian people to confront different challenges. The head of state also met with Jordan's Crown Prince Al Hussein ibn Abdullah, who is taking part in the forum. The Jordanian Crown Prince's participation is his third at the annual event.
Welcome back. And indeed, Crown Prince Hussein bin Abdullah also attended the forum, and I guess that was representing his country, but in a way he was attending the World Youth Forum that took place on the land of peace, on the land of Egypt. But still, we're with our main discussion and the meetings the President held on the sidelines of the forum with both the Palestinian and the Lebanese leaders. Let me here welcome our guest over the phone, Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you so much. And President, or the Palestinian President was attending the World Youth Forum, and President Sisi received him on the sidelines of this forum. Your reading to the visit and your reading to the meeting itself.
This is normal, of course, and it shows the interest of Egypt to solve the Palestinian problem, of course. Egypt is the largest country in the Arab world, the most important military force, and you cannot find one family in Egypt without a victim for the sake of the Palestinian question. So we are very keen, for many reasons, to have this, to see a settlement for the Palestinian problem. We have really shame on the whole world that this is the only country which is still occupied with foreign forces. And nobody is trying really to do something practical. Of course, we have many resolutions in the United Nations, in the international level and in the regional level. Europe is trying to help the Palestinians. By the way, Europe is the largest donor to the Palestinian Authority. But we still have problems on both sides. In Israel, since the establishment of Israel, not a single time that we have seen one party ruling Israel. It's always a sort of a coalition between left and right, and those who are very stubborn about the problem. On the other side, really, we have a weakness on the Palestinian side. We have, of course, the authority of PLO headed by Abu Mazen, and we have Hamas, who is ruling in Gaza, separating itself from the whole stream of the Palestinian efforts to solve their problem. And Egypt in the middle, trying to bring all the parties of Palestine together in order to see one solution for the whole Palestinian territories. And we hope this can continue. Also, we have a sort of short problem, which is the last aggression from Israel, and Egypt has allocated millions of dollars in order to help re-establishment of Gaza. And we shall never stop helping Palestine, whether in the main area or in Gaza. This is the situation, and I am sorry to say I am not that optimistic. The international level is not doing enough to help the Palestinians. So of course, the Palestinian question became a sort of just give some economic help or food or whatever to make the Palestinian living, but not a serious decision or serious movement towards having to stop the settlements of Israel, to stop the occupation of Israel, whether to the Palestinian territories or to the Syrian territories in the Golan. Nobody dare to talk to Israel seriously, and this is the situation. I am for a change. I am always optimistic, but not in this situation at this time.
Your Excellency, you're speaking here about three issues in the Palestinian cause. First, the stagnant position of the Israeli side, who are not moving ahead with any measures that would lead to real developments in the Palestinian cause. We're speaking also about the inability of some of the world bodies to help the Palestinians, including, for an instance, the UNRWA, in which President Sisi has stressed very much on the importance of financing this organization to help refugees. The third is the situation in the Palestinian territories and reconciliation among the Palestinian factions themselves. So,
yes, on one side there are some good news that whenever we went to the United Nations, we have a huge voting with us. Take the voting concerning the American embassy in Jerusalem, where 149 countries voted with us. Only Israel and the Americans voted for their sake. Another good news that most of the international organizations are trying to help the Palestinian people to continue living, such as you said, the UNRWA, and the European Union has said it is the largest regional organization helping the Palestinian. Egypt is helping tremendously. All the Arab countries, whether Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, the Gulf, are hosting many Palestinians. You can see many of them around us in Egypt, whether to study or to work or whatever. So, as a matter of fact, the good part of the story that we are helping the Palestinians to continue living, but still we do not have a decision or a movement towards stop the occupation of Israel to the Palestinian territories. By the way, the European Union do not import any commodities coming from the settlements of Israel in the Palestinian territory, and they do not recognize this sort of occupation. But we still lack a serious decision or a serious practical movement to, I don't want to say to push, but to convince Israel that Israel has no future with this policy. Even some Jewish communities in the United States, they say, and they see that Israel with this policy have no future to stay in a place with all the borders full of enemies, with inside Israel. They are creating enemies every day by their practices against the Palestinians.
Yes.
And even the President of the United States, he said that the two-state solution is the only thing to secure the future of Israel. But unfortunately, in Israel, not many people would understand what we are saying, or maybe they understand, but they do not want to give up the ambitions of having much more than they deserve. This is the situation we are facing, but really, I must say also I admire the Palestinian position, where all the Palestinians, the individuals, are still living in their own country, trying to continue, and they are not abide to the efforts of Israel to send them away from their country.
Correct me if I'm wrong, sir, but for the United Nations to recognize Israel, it should first recognize the two independent states, the Israeli and the Palestinian, living side by side. Am I wrong, or isn't this the situation in the United Nations?
You are absolutely right. And really, since the 40s of the last century, we have plenty of United Nations decisions and resolutions. The problem that we have a country who does not recognize or respect the international resolutions, and it declares quite simply that it will not implement any resolution like that. But legally and according to the international law and the international organizations, the Palestinians had all the right to keep their country united and to not to recognize what Israel is doing. So, according to the international law, according to the international organization, mainly the United Nations organization, we are in a very good position. How we can implement and how we can make Israel recognize all this, and to encourage the United States, to encourage Israel to abide to what the international community decided concerning the Palestinian question.
I guess that has to return back to Israel and ask them if they want to be already recognized by a world body like the United Nations, because it seems that they are not so much, very much interested with the issue. Anyway, the Palestinian cause, or Egypt has been always taking the helm of supporting the Palestinian cause ever since the very, very beginning. But recently, and during the past 10 years, the Palestinian cause itself retreated because of the crises that took place or erupted in the Middle East at large. How far do you think that this has given Israel an excuse or even the reason behind not being accelerating with any kind of moves that would help any development in the stalemate of this conflict?
I am afraid that in Israel, those who are against any peaceful solution are becoming more and more majority. And of course, what you are saying is quite clear to people in the kind of our partner Shimon Peres and his colleagues, those who signed the agreement with Egypt. They appreciate what Egypt did, but they understand also that Palestine for us is not only a problem of a neighbor or a brother country. It is the Arab security, is the Egyptian security also, and we shall never stop supporting the Palestinian question. Shimon Peres once told me that the problem now, that those who are ruling Israel now, they were born after 1967. They have seen Israel occupying Sinai, and the borderline was the Suez Canal. The generation of Shimon Peres who signed the peace agreement, they know that they establish a country on the account of other countries there, and they are ready to withdraw. The new generation is not ready to do that unless the whole world and the big forces would convince them that this is not good for the Israeli future. So it is becoming, day after another, it's becoming a sort of a complicated problem. The new generation and those stubborn politicians are not ready to give up what they are doing now.
Yeah,
but I don't see any future to this policy. And as I belong to the oldest civilization of the world, I am quite sure that if we just close our eyes for 20 years to come, there is not any future to this policy of Israel. That is one part of my optimism. And I think there is no future to this policy. But until then, until we find a serious solution and a fair solution, we have to help the Palestinians to continue staying in their own country, to continue resisting what is happening. And at the end, of course, I hope that history will stand beside us and we shall win this cause, inshallah.
Hopefully, sir, that we can really move forward with this cause that has been for too long. But unless we really, or not we, but the Middle East realize a kind of stability and security in all its countries, I guess it will be far-fetched to find a real and concrete solution to the Palestinian cause. Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you so much for being with us. Let me have this quick report and Lebanon on the ground and the situation in Lebanon on the ground, and we'll come back for more discussion.
Schools, universities and many shops were closed in Lebanon as a general strike by public transportation and labor unions paralyzed the crisis-hit Middle East nation. Protesters closed the country's major highways as well as roads inside cities and towns starting at 5 a.m. to protest fuel prices that have increased at an alarming rate after the government lifted subsidies. Taxi and truck drivers used their vehicles to block roads. In the capital of Beirut, many roads were blocked by giant trash bins and vehicles. The protest action comes as the Lebanese pound has continued to tumble against the dollar. About 80% of people in Lebanon live in poverty after the Lebanese pound lost more than 90% of its value in the past 2 years. The Lebanese crisis is considered one of the worst economic crises in modern times.
Right, welcome back. And as we said at the very beginning, that on the sidelines of the World Youth Forum, President Sisi also received the Lebanese Prime Minister Naguib Mikati, where he asserted the unique nature of ties between Egypt and Lebanon and the full support of Egypt to the Lebanese government and people in pursuing their aspiration. I guess to discuss the issue and the developments of on the ground in Lebanon, we have with us over the phone Dr. Hassan Waghi, Professor of International Relations. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Right. So we're speaking about this meeting that took place at the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, where the Lebanese Prime Minister was visiting and attended this forum and his meeting with the President. Let me take your reading to the meeting and the mutual statements between both sides.
Yes, it was a good meeting. Actually, the context is very important, is that we have a militarized international community witnessing that kind of dialogue. And it was important to shed light on the importance of the Egyptian role in the area and the importance of Lebanon as an important Arab country that is really under attack, and it is like a ground for experiences by foreign elements, and we have to stand firmly next to it.
We're speaking about Lebanon, so we're speaking about different elements that are affecting really the situation in Lebanon. Let me here take what you respectively said, the Egyptian role in supporting Lebanon, particularly during the past period. How do you view the Egyptian role? How did Egypt support Lebanon at this very particular stage? How do Lebanese see how Egypt is supporting their countries, and how do the world really reflect to what the situation in Lebanon?
Yeah, I think that the Egyptian role is extremely important in standing firm to help the Lebanese government stand against the challenges facing this very important Arab country. And it is, as I've said, it is a ground for experiences of intervention from other foreign powers, and Egypt's role is to help Lebanon stand against all these kind of challenges because it is an important Arab country. It serves us in establishing the Arab regime again to be strong, along with the Egyptian plan to have Iraq and to have Jordan and to have these elements, these important countries to make renaissance for the Arab system, which is very needed to face unprecedented challenges.
Recently, Egypt has sent or has been trying to extend gas to Lebanon through Jordan and through some countries. But the issue here is, how do you view such a position from Egypt regarding the Lebanese people? Plus, what really contributed to the deteriorating situation in Lebanon to reach such an extent?
Yes, I think that one of the most important factors that caused that kind of deterioration is the foreign intervention, number one. And also, let us not forget that the COVID-19 and this epidemic has impacted many countries all over the world. And Lebanon was also suffering severely from that kind of epidemic and shortage of health and support. I think that these two elements are very important in deteriorating the situation. But one of the most important things is that the Lebanese should gather their internal forces, because any country that is not able to mobilize its internal forces together, it becomes open to penetration and intervention from any other power. And this is very natural in our world today, which is conducted by the zero-sum. Egypt is trying to play the win-win game inside the Arab countries and with the Arab countries versus or vis-a-vis the challenges we are all facing on so many fronts.
Actually, so you pinpointed your finger on a very important issue, which is polarization. And
Yes.
The polarization of the different factors or elements inside Lebanon make the problem widen.
Yes.
How far is a kind of finding consensus among all the parties inside Lebanon, excluding, as you said respectively, the foreign entities who are imposing a kind of agenda on the Lebanese government, would really help Lebanon move forward with its stability?
Yeah, actually, when it comes to the issue of polarization, I think this is one of the, what we call the fourth and fifth generation wars being launched against countries for the sake of some powers outside outsider power. And I think that one of the most important things is to deal with this polarization by minimizing its impact, by trying to cancel it out by so many modalities that really needs a lot of exhaustive analysis and exhaustive discourses to be analyzed and to draw the lessons from them. So this is a general thing about polarization. And when it comes to the situation of polarization in Lebanon, it is a very complicated situation because Lebanon has many factions, has many parties with many orientations, and I think the Lebanese has to understand that they should rise up to face this challenge by uniting themselves, by trying to attack corruption that's taking place sometimes, in some era that really exploited by this power, by interventionist power, and by the elite that really wants to control and to keep the situation as it is, polarized, scattered. And I think the Lebanese elite and the Lebanese power should unite themselves and should try to play the role for dealing with this terrible polarization, which is the root of the problem, actually.
Yes, indeed. Dr. Hassan Waqi, Professor of International Relations at Al-Azhar University, thank you so much for being with us over the phone. And remains to be seen how will the Lebanese parties come together and prioritize the interest of Lebanon over any other interests. And definitely Egypt will be always the support for all parties. And definitely Egypt will be the support for the stability of the Middle East at large. I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Until next Saturday with another important Arab file, it's goodbye.